Her name was Mary Mclaughlin, a mother, a grandmother. At 58, she lived in Glasgow in 1984. Mary, who had raised 11 children, knew her neighbourhood well. She lived on Claythorne Street, enjoying simple pleasures like visits with her children and chats with neighbours. On Wednesdays, she'd visit the local pub for dominoes. September 26th was no different, or so it seemed. Mary left her flat and walked to the pub. Friends saw her in good spirits. It was the last time they would see her smile. She walked home. But something was different this night. We can only imagine her unease. She was seen with a man. They were seen near a chip shop. The details are lost to time. Mary was unknowingly walking toward the end of her story, accompanied by a stranger. The door to her flat was about to close behind her for the last time. The days that followed were filled with worry. Mary was a constant in her family's life. So when she missed a planned meeting with her son, Martin, alarm bells rang. Calls went unanswered. A knock on her door was met with silence. The family knew something was terribly wrong. On October 2nd, they went to her flat. Finding a way in, they stepped across the threshold. Hope vanished, replaced by a scene of unimaginable horror. The quiet they had sensed was the quiet of death. Mary was there, on her bed. She had been strangled with a cord from her own dressing gown. The scene spoke of a profound violation. For the family, the world tilted on its axis. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. The police were called and the investigation began. For the Mclaughlin family, the nightmare had already started. It was a wound that would never fully heal. The Glasgow police descended on Claythorne Street with purpose. In 1984, police work was a different beast. It was about knocking on doors, interviewing witnesses, and chasing down leads with shoe leather and intuition. And they had leads, or so it seemed. The man seen with Mary on her final night became the focus. Descriptions were gathered, sketches were drawn, and appeals were made to the public. Who was this slim, dark-haired man? He was the key, they believed. The police worked tirelessly, interviewing hundreds of people, trying to piece together Mary's last hours and identify the phantom who had walked with her into the night. The investigation, however, hit a wall, and then another. The witness descriptions, while helpful, were varied enough to be frustrating. The man remained a ghost. The forensic science of the era, though the best available, had its limits. Investigators collected what they could from the scene: fingerprints, fibers, biological samples. They knew the killer had left traces of himself behind. A cigarette end was found in the flat, a potential link. But without a suspect to match them to, the evidence was a collection of clues without a culprit. The case file grew thicker, filled with dead ends and frustrating maybes. The pressure was immense. The murder of a 58-year-old grandmother in her own home had shaken the city. The media followed the case closely. Each new detail, or lack thereof, reported with intensity. The police were confident they would solve it. They had a good description of the suspect, they told the public. They were sure an arrest was imminent. But weeks turned into months, and the trail grew colder with each passing day. The initial flurry of activity slowed to a crawl, and the name of the prime suspect, a man who existed only in sketches and fleeting memories, remained unknown. Ultimately, the investigation stalled. With no new leads, no forensic matches, and no confession, the case was quietly moved from the active file to the cold case archives. It was a failure, not for lack of effort, but for lack of technology. The police had done everything they could with the tools they had. They had followed the procedures of the time, but the killer had slipped through their grasp. For the city of Glasgow, the story of Mary Mclaughlin faded from the headlines, becoming another tragic, unsolved crime. But for her family, the failure of the investigation meant something else entirely. There would be no answers, no justice, and no peace. As the official investigation stalled, the Mclaughlin family began their own private search for answers. With no killer identified, suspicion grew within the family. Was it a stranger, or someone they knew? The lack of an arrest threatened to tear them apart. Whispers started, and certain family members fell under suspicion. Relationships became strained, fractured by the unsaid. The killer had planted a seed of discord that would grow for years. The years rolled by, but the murder remained an open wound. Anniversaries came and went, a painful reminder of justice denied. The case was forgotten by the world, But for her children, it was a living part of their existence. They never gave up hope, holding on to the belief that there would be an answer. They wanted people to remember her not as a victim, but as the vibrant woman she was. They waited, holding on to a fragile faith that the silence would finally be broken. While the Mclaughlin family waited, a quiet revolution was happening in forensic laboratories around the world. Back in 1984, when Mary was murdered, the concept of DNA profiling was still in its infancy, a theoretical marvel just emerging from the brilliant mind of Sir Alec Jeffreys. The idea that a person's unique genetic code could be used to identify them from even the smallest trace of biological material. A drop of blood, a strand of hair, or just a single skin cell felt like the stuff of science fiction. The evidence collected from Mary's flat was preserved, but honestly, its true potential was locked away, just waiting for technology to catch up. Throughout the late 1980s and 90s, DNA technology evolved at a breathtaking pace. What started as a complex, time-consuming process became faster, more sensitive, and way more reliable. National DNA databases were established, creating vast libraries of genetic profiles from convicted offenders. Suddenly, cold cases were no longer simply dormant files. They were potential treasure troves of evidence. A smudge on a piece of clothing, a sample stored in a freezer for 20 years, could now hold the key to solving a decades-old crime. Detectives and scientists began to look back, reopening the books on cases once deemed unsolvable. The key was the ability to develop a full DNA profile from smaller and more degraded samples. The evidence from Mary's bedroom, specifically the knot in the dressing gown cord used to strangle her, had been carefully preserved. In 1984, the technology to extract a clear DNA profile from such a sample simply did not exist. But by the 2010s, forensic science had advanced to a point where even minute quantities of cellular material left behind by the killer's touch could be isolated and analysed. The ghost in the machine was about to give up its secrets. This new era of forensic investigation gave hope to countless families, including the Mclaughlins. Police forces across the UK established dedicated cold case units, often called review or unresolved homicide teams. Their mission was to systematically re-examine old cases through the lens of new technology. They would pull dusty evidence boxes from storage, sending items to the lab that had been sitting untouched for decades. The ligature from Mary Mclaughlin's murder scene was one such item. After more than 30 years of silence, the most crucial piece of evidence in the case was about to speak. In 2019, 35 years after Mary's death, Scotland's Cold Case Unit re-examined her file. They decided to re-examine the physical evidence using the latest forensic techniques, focusing on the dressing gown cord. Investigators believed the killer's DNA would be on the knot. The lab developed a full DNA profile of an unknown male and ran it through the National DNA database. A match. The name was Graham McGill, never a suspect. His DNA was in the database due to later convictions and was irrefutably linked to Mary's murder. The police had their man. In 1984, McGill was a 22-year-old petty criminal, fitting the description of the man seen with Mary. The arrest came swiftly. For the Mclaughlin family, it was a bombshell. After 37 years, a name was finally put to their mother's killer. The stage was set for trial. In 2021, Graham McGill stood trial for a crime committed decades earlier. The prosecution's case relied on DNA evidence found on the victim's dressing gown cord. The odds of the DNA belonging to someone else were 1 in a billion. McGill claimed a secret affair with Mary Mclaughlin to explain his DNA's presence. The jury weighed his story against the scientific evidence. Mary Mclaughlin's family waited for the truth. The jury rejected McGill's story. They found him guilty of murder. Justice, long delayed, had finally been delivered. McGill was led away, his secret exposed. The guilty verdict brought a profound sense of relief to the Mclaughlin family. The man who had haunted their lives for 37 years was finally held accountable. The internal suspicions that had caused so much pain were finally, officially, laid to rest. Justice had been done. But then came the sentence. Graham McGill was given a life sentence, but the judge set the minimum term at just 14 years. For the family, this felt like a blow. 14 years for a life he had so brutally taken, and a secret he had kept for nearly 4 decades. The reaction was one of shock and disappointment. Mary's children spoke out, expressing their belief that the sentence was far too lenient. They felt it did not reflect the gravity of the crime or the immense suffering McGill had caused. He had not only murdered their mother, but had also allowed them to live with suspicion for most of their adult lives. He had stolen decades of peace from them. The public largely agreed, with many feeling that the punishment did not fit the crime. The sentence sparked a debate about what constitutes true justice. The case of Mary Mclaughlin stands as a powerful testament to science and hope. It highlights how DNA technology has revolutionized criminal justice, reaching back in time to right old wrongs and provide answers to families who had long given up. It offers hope to others still waiting for breakthroughs in their own cold cases. No case is ever truly closed as long as evidence remains. The invisible trace left behind by a killer can eventually become their undoing. In the end, what is the legacy of this case? It is a story of a family's unwavering love and their long, painful wait for truth. It restored the name of Mary Mclaughlin. She is no longer just the victim of an unsolved murder. She is a mother and grandmother whose killer was finally unmasked. While no sentence can bring her back, the verdict ensured that the final word was one of truth and justice.